Stephen Guilbeault is the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. He's in Vancouver. Minister Guilbeault, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
The overall goal of this is an emission reduction of 40% below 2005 levels, but you're only asking oil and gas to cut by 31%. Why not ask the country's largest emitter to do more here?
The analysis we did was very specific to each sector. It would have made sense really to have a one-size-fit-all. The reality of the sectors, their path towards decarbonization or lowering their emissions or pollution levels aren't the same. So in fact, you see quite a wide margin of reduction projections for different sectors, ranging from -1% for agriculture between 2005 and 2030, all the way to 87% for the electricity sector. And so what we looked at is what is the potential to deploy technology in certain cases to change practices, to change behavior, to get to those emission reduction. So again, it's very different from sector to sector. And true, the oil and gas sector has a reduction projection for 2030 of 31% from 2005 levels. But if you look at what it represents according to current levels, it's more than 40% reduction. So it's a very ambitious, but we feel realistic projection to get to for the oil and gas sector.
That's right, yeah. It's 31% compared to 2005, but 42% compared by the current levels. But one of the things that's missing here is, I guess, a question of how do you ensure these reductions? Because you promised a cap on the sector, a legislated cap that would be a hard cap to force a reduction, but it's not here. So how do you enforce it, and when will we see an actual legislated cap on the oil and gas sector?
I would simply correct, David, that the oil and gas cap is mentioned in the plan, but we are in the process of defining how we'll go about to do that. And frankly, when it comes to climate change, there is no silver bullet. There is no one single measure that's going to get us there. So we've deployed since 2015 more than 100 measures in terms of investment, in terms of regulation, price on carbon. The oil and gas cap is one of those many tools in our toolbox, if you want, but we're also put in place regulations on reducing methane emission. Methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. We're on track to reducing methane emission in the oil and gas sector between 40 and 45% in 2025, just 3 years from now, and our goal is to get to 75% reduction by 2030. So your question was, how do we get there? Well, we get there, but by having ambitious regulations, but also working with the sector, the oil and gas sector, the auto sector, steel, cement, aluminum, agricultural sector, to help them decarbonize, to help them reduce pollution. So the government is investing to help these sectors to work with different regions of Canada, but we're also asking those sectors to invest with us as well, so that we can get there.
Right, but we were both in Glasgow when the Prime Minister spoke about this cap at COP26. This was something in the last election. So when do we see this come into force? Because you have interim targets for 2026, you have a firm Paris target for 2030, and then the total net zero by 2050. And so time is of the essence. So when are we going to see this actually put in place with force of law?
We're in the process of developing the oil and gas cap. We are holding consultations right now with Indigenous leadership, provinces, territories, obviously oil and gas companies and other stakeholders. And I'm confident that in the coming months, we'll be able to present what exactly the oil and gas cap will be.
You know, when you look at a lot of the other sectoral solutions, right, housing retrofits or the greater adoption of electric vehicles, I don't want to say those are easy things, but you can see a very clear path there, right? This is something that you put money into and it creates jobs, and you can see where the emission reduction comes from. Oil and gas is a much more challenging situation. So I wonder, how do you see the rest of this decade looking in that sector? I mean, what does oil and gas in Canada look like in 2030?
It is a sector like other sectors of our economy that will need to decarbonize, to lower their levels of pollution, because that's where the world is heading. If you read the last report from the International Energy Agency, we will go from a world that is currently producing around 90 million barrels of oil every day to a world where we will only be producing about 25 million barrels of oil every day in 2050. So a 75% reduction in oil consumption and production in the coming decades. And so we will still be using oil in 2050, but that oil will need to be very low emitting and even net zero oil, basically. So the sector has to decarbonize if it wants to have a future, if we want to continue ensuring that we have good jobs and that the regions in Canada that are dependent on oil and gas have a future. We need to decarbonize that sector.
But what does that disruption look like, sir? I know there's a lot of criticism from the NDP, for example, that you subsidize oil and gas. But it seems like if we're going to have this sort of transition, particularly in the oil sands, that's going to take private capital and public capital, right? So what kind of a disruption are we looking at there in terms of job numbers, and how much is the federal government prepared to spend to help make the changes that are necessary in Alberta's most important industry?
I would beg to differ in terms of your characterization of how it's going to happen. I mean, what we're proposing is a very organized and articulated strategy to make this happen. I think if we don't do anything, then it's going to get very disorganized. And we're trying to avoid that at all costs. If you look at Calgary, probably has the highest concentration of engineers of any city in Canada, and maybe probably in the G7. There's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of know-how. Some of the technologies we're proposing to put forward, where the federal government will invest in decarbonization of the oil and gas sector, as we're investing right now hundreds of millions of dollars to decarbonize the auto sector. You might have seen a number of announcements in the hundreds of millions of dollars in the last few weeks in battery technology in Canada. 3 different companies, and the federal government is investing. These companies are investing as well. We're doing the same thing in buildings. We're doing the same thing with different heavy industry, steel, aluminum, cement. It's no different in the oil and gas sector. We will be phasing out fossil fuels to subsidize the production of oil and gas, but we will be accompanying the sector to invest in technologies to reduce pollution.
Okay, just to clarify, I said it would be disruptive, like creative disruption through technology, not disorganized. Just I don't want you to think it's good. I don't anticipate it'll be chaotic. I think obviously the oil companies are very good at planning. But look, while I've got you, I have to ask you about a very specific oil project, being a Newfoundlander and Labradorian, and that's the Bay du Nord project off Newfoundland and Labrador. That project is waiting for you to give it the green light or the red light. There's a lot of anxiety in Newfoundland and Labrador over delays in that decision, and now they see this plan to cut emissions by 2030. Does the Bay du Nord project fit into this emissions plan?
The plan that we're proposing today is not about any single project. And in fact, if you look at the plan carefully, you will see that we have factored in, you used analysis from the Canadian Energy Regulator, for example, that forecasts increase in oil and gas production between now and 2030. So the plan is not about one specific project. And when it comes to Bay du Nord, I am doing my due diligence as minister. There's a lot of information to review. It's a complex project. But we have said that we would make a decision that I will make a decision in the coming weeks.
The implications of it, though, sir, if you don't approve this, it essentially breaks the spine of the Newfoundland and Labrador oil and gas industry. It's the only project in development, and I'm sure you're aware of what the political stakes of that would be. I mean, are you prepared to say no to this project?
Again, David, I won't speculate as to what decision I will make will be, because I'm still in the process of reviewing all the information. But again, the decision will be made in the coming weeks.
Okay, one last question before we let you go. The Environment Commissioner's report in November criticized your government for having the worst emissions record in the G7 since the Paris Agreement was signed. You've come out with another emissions reduction plan. How can Canadians be assured that this isn't another target that Canada will miss?
First, Canadians can see that we've actually flattened the curve. When we came into power in 2015, emissions were not going down; they were going up. And through the measures that we've deployed between 2016 and 2019, we've been able to reduce emissions by 30 million tons projected to the 2030 to the year 2030. So our plan is working, but we need to accelerate it. And in fact, fact, I will have more good news to announce in a couple of weeks when the national inventories, Canada's national greenhouse gas inventories, are made public in terms of the trajectory of our emissions in Canada.
Okay, Minister Guilbeault, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.